In this video, I'm going to be showing how to whip and knot the ends of a rope so that you can turn this into this. You can see it's whipped and it has a thistle knot at the end. So the way I start is I just have an upholstery needle and some upholstery thread, and I kind of separate the three strands of the rope and slide the needle right between them. And I use a piece of upholstery thread that is about chest and an arm span long. You can experiment to see what measurement length works for you. If you have exceptionally long arms, maybe just one arm length will work. If it's very short, maybe two arm lengths will work. I thread this in the needle, and the way I measure how much to pull through is I just use my hand as a guide, and I pull right about to the end, and then this I'm just going to kind of wrap around the rope just so it's out of the way. And now I take the long end and I'm just going to start wrapping, and I wrap in the same direction, kind of following the spiral of the rope itself. And as you wrap, every once in a while I just sort of pull, make sure everything's tight and close together. For me personally, I choose colors of thread based on the type of rope that I'm whipping and also the length of the rope. So I have reinforced jute uplines that are reinforced with spectra, and for that I use one color. And then for the rest of my rope kit, I use different colors based on lengths. So the standard kind of 6 to 8 meter lengths, I use blue. For this kind of a half length rope, I use red. And then for a quarter length rope, I use black. But of course, you can choose whatever color scheme you want. You can see as it kind of separates, I just use my nails and the thread itself to pull it all together. You want to make sure that the whipping is at least as wide as your rope is thick. So for this is 6mm jute. So I want to make sure that the whipping is at least 6mm, and this is going to be quite a bit longer than that just because I like the look of it. But you want it to be at least that thick. And I found that there's enough tension or enough friction between the thread and the rope that if you let go, it's not going to unwind too badly. So you're kind of free to let go of the thread at any point. You don't have to keep too much tension on it. Alright, so once we get to about here, I'm going to compare the lengths, and I want the working end that I've been working on to be a little bit longer than the other end. Now I'm going to get my needle back out, and what I'm going to do is go where this kind of standing thread is between these two ropes, or the two yarns. I'm going to take my needle and put it between those two, and then that wrapping and the working end, I'm going to thread. And then pull through. Now, if again you follow the spiral of of those yarns and see where it sort of naturally falls, I'm going to go up the other way there because I'm going to tie those two ends together with a square knot. And this just sort of enhances efficiency of this whole process. So I'm going to go through here. Now I've got my two strands. And this one is again just a little bit longer because I'm going to tie the knot up at this end of the whipping. And I try and get this tight. Depending on the type of thread you're using, you don't want to pull too hard, otherwise it might snap and then you're going to have to start all over. But I just try and keep that pretty tight. I'm doing a square knot. Now, if you do lose a little bit of tension and the knot isn't super tight, that's not the end of the world. There. So now my square knot is done. Now what I'm going to do is use these two threads together. If there's a huge difference in their lengths, I'll trim it down so that they're about the same. Here it's only, less than 1/4 of an inch difference, so I'm not too worried about that. Now, the idea here is I'm going to be crisscrossing up and down along the creases between the ropes, and that's going to hold the entire whipping together and increase some of that friction and keep it from sliding around. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to get this needle back out, and where this is seated, this time I'm going to go this direction. If you have a thimble, this is a good time to use it. I typically don't, but it can be helpful if your ropes are especially tight. I'm going to pull through. Now it's coming out here, and I'm going to follow this around to where the crease ends on the other side. Put my needle through there. Thread both threads through, pull through, and then you just keep following that pattern. You just keep working in this spiral direction. So I'm going to drop my needle. Pull through here. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I have about one whipping length of thread left. So I'm just about there. I could probably do one more, but I'm just going to, at this point, end this. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go under the whipping. And here, you're really going to want something to push the needle with, either a thimble or I just used the blunt side of my knife. You kind of want to watch and make sure. You want to try and get the needle all the way through all the whipping without going through the rope. If it comes out a little early, it's not a big deal, but this is really going to hold everything together. And so now I like to get this as far through as I can, depending on how much thread I have. I'm going to grab the needle one last time, both threads. And now I actually just use pliers at the very end here to pull everything through. And then just use a knife, find right where it comes out, and just trim. And that's the end of the whipping. So you can see we've got those threads holding the whipping together, kind of compressing it all. It's all compacted very tight and nice. This isn't necessary in order to tie the thistle knot, but it does help to have something, either whipping or electrical tape. So if you don't like the look of the whipping, you can use electrical tape or some other sort of tape, or even just tie another knot here, like an overhand knot, and then tie the thistle knot ahead of it. But again, I like the color coding of the rope, and I think it looks nice. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this overhand knot out of the rope, and these yarns fortunately are spun pretty tight, so they'll hold together pretty well. If your rope, if the individual yarns start to separate, you might want to wrap some electrical tape around the very ends. So here I have the 3 yarns all separated, and the way to tie a thistle knot is you start with a crown knot, which is tied like this. So I'm going to refer to these as, rope or yarn 1, 2, and 3, or the first, second, and third. So I'm going to take the first and go over the second. I'm going to take the second and go over the first and the third. And I'm going to take the third, and it's going to go through this bite formed by the first. And that creates a crown knot. And the crown knot is right where my finger is. Right here. You can see this is the crown knot. And to form the thistle knot now, I'm going to say this is the first. It's going to go around this and then up through the top of the crown. So where my finger is in the crown, you can kind of see it forms this triangle pattern. The idea is we want each of the yarns to go up through there in order to tie the thistle knot. So I'm going to take this one and go around and then up through. Third turn, take this second one, go around and up through. Take the third, around and up through. So now the thistle knot is tied, it's just not compacted. So now all we have to do is dress the knot. So I like to hold all 3 yarns and find one of them and kind of pull this down, not incredibly tight, but just tight enough to kind of hold everything together so it's not going to move around. Go right about there. Pull it tight. Again, not incredibly tight because we want room to move the other two yarns. And we want to try and make this symmetrical. So I'm going to pull this one, pull through, kind of tight, and find our last one. Pull up, and the thistle knot is forming. If you need, you can use pliers or needle nose pliers to pull this really tight. I found that's not necessary if you kind of work it slowly. Typically takes maybe 2 or 3 times around to get it to that point. You just kind of look for where it looks loose. Now I have my thistle knot tied. You can kind of keep pulling on it and working it and dressing it, but it's now tied. And now it's really not going to go anywhere. So I'm just going to dress that a little more. Sometimes it helps to rub to really compact it down, but as long as you just keep pulling on it, it'll be in good shape. Now, the way I like to finish this is take each of the yarns and unspin them so that they become the individual threads. And this will sort of work itself out as you use the rope. But I like to give it a head start. I like the look of that. Then one final thing is to kind of cut this down. Again, using very precise measurements. I just use the blade of my knife. If it's a little bit away from the end of the knot, I just kind of wrap around, pull, and that's how I measure the very end. So it should be a little over an inch, maybe an inch or just a little more, and that'll do it. Now the nice thing about these knots is, again, they're much smaller than an overhand knot, so it's easier to do pull-throughs, but they're still large enough that when you do a join, if you use a lark's head like this, a lark's head will still collapse or it'll still catch them. So if I pull the lark's head tight around these, you can still use it for a rope join. So, I hope this is helpful, and enjoy your whipping and knotting.